Hello, everyone. This is video 26 on components of the blood. If we look at the composition of blood, we can break it up into two major components, the plasma and the cellular components. The majority of the blood is the liquid matrix that we refer to as plasma. Remember, blood is a type of connective tissue, and the definition of connective tissue is living cells embedded in a matrix made up of proteins and other substances. The plasma forms the matrix of the connective tissue of blood. So, major constituent of plasma is actually water, which serves the function as a solvent. And embedded in the water is ions that are dissolved. We refer to these as the blood electrolytes: sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, chloride, bicarbonate. You might recognize these as being the minerals that we discussed in the section on nutrition. And their purpose is to regulate osmotic balance, so the movement of water back and forth across the body, but also to buffer the pH and regulate membrane permeability and actually create action potentials and the electrical signals that are used in muscles and the nervous system. There is also a number of proteins in the blood. The albumin, also antibodies used by the immune system, and many other proteins that are used for transporting lipids and for forming blood clots. So each of these have functions in maintaining homeostasis, but these are not cells. These are just small proteins that do this job. They are manufactured by cells. And then we have all the substances that we know as nutrients, such as glucose, fatty acids, the vitamins. But we're also going to have waste products that are produced by living cells of the body tissue. The products of metabolism, carbon dioxide, nitrogen waste. And of course, we also are going to have oxygen that's going to be delivered to the mitochondria to produce ATP. All of that would be the constituents of plasma, because these are ions, proteins, and other molecules that are not living cells. But the remaining 45% of blood is made up of living cells. So this is called the cellular components. The majority of the living cells are what's known as erythrocytes, the red blood cells. In a volume of blood, so in a microliter, we actually have about 5 to 6 million erythrocytes that are transporting oxygen throughout the body. The second most common is small portions of cells that are known as platelets. The platelets are one of the primary structures used to form blood clots. And so typically there would be a little less than a quarter to a half million of these per microliter of blood. And then the remaining ones are much larger cells and a wider variety of cells that are known as leukocytes, or the white blood cells. This is your immune system. And so basophils, neutrophils, eosinophils, lymphocytes, and monocytes are a couple of varieties of them. You will have more or less of these white blood cells depending on whether you have an active infection. And the type of cell can help identify whether it's bacterial, viral, or fungal, because each one of these becomes specialized for fighting off particular types of pathogens. So again, when we look at blood being a connective tissue, here's an illustration of the cells, the much larger purple things being white blood cells or leukocytes, the erythrocytes and platelets. But we look at the function of circulating blood. One of them is transportation of nutrients and waste products, but also regulation, because something we haven't mentioned yet is that there might also be hormones that are in the blood. This is how your endocrine system controls things. And then, of course, protection being the white blood cells and the platelets forming protection from blood loss to form blood clots. So again, here's this picture showing the red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. But let's look at one of the primary functions of transport, which has to do with oxygen. And in order to efficiently carry oxygen, we require a specific transport carrier protein that will selectively bind with oxygen, but also will unbind with oxygen. And one of those molecules is a molecule known as hemoglobin, which is what's found in a red blood cell, like found in humans and mammals. Now, a molecule of hemoglobin is actually a protein. It's a polypeptide, so it's a long string of amino acids. The protein, kind of the structure of an individual molecule shown here, has 4 iron atoms that are essential components to it, because it's the iron that does the chemical bond to the free oxygen molecules. So in the alveoli of the lungs, as the blood passes around the alveoli, oxygen will diffuse into the red blood cell, so coming across the walls of the capillary and entering the red blood cell, and then the oxygen molecules will bind to the iron molecules. Every individual hemoglobin molecule has 4 iron, so it can bind 4 oxygen molecules, or 4 seats. But an individual red blood cell doesn't contain just one hemoglobin protein. They actually contain about 250 million hemoglobin molecules in every individual red blood cell. That means, since each one carries 4 oxygen, every red blood cell carries around 1 billion molecules of oxygen. Now, if we look back at our chart of erythrocytes, a single microliter of blood contains 5 million red blood cells. If each one of them are carrying 1 million, and we per microliter, and realize an average adult human has between 5 and 6 liters, you can just imagine the incredible number of oxygen molecules that's being transported every moment by your circulatory system. But that's necessary because your mitochondria are using an enormous amount of oxygen every moment in the body. And so the blood has to keep up with that. So we're probably most familiar with hemoglobin, but if we look at the diversity of animals, we have to learn that hemoglobin is not the only molecule that can carry oxygen. It just happens to be the one that's used in most vertebrates. But there are other molecules that can be used to carry oxygen in other species. Now, in mollusks and many arthropods, it's, instead of hemoglobin, it's called hemocyanin. And instead of iron, it uses copper. When oxygen binds to the copper, it forms a bluish green color. So you may have seen blood from mollusks, so clams, but also some insects, that may be a bluish green color. That's because they use copper instead of iron. And it's just the normal color of copper when it's bound to oxygen. This is the same color as the Statue of Liberty, and for the same reason. Statue of Liberty is made of copper, and it's oxidized, so it's bound to oxygen. So it's that type of color. The only reason that blood in a vertebrate is red is because the molecular bond of oxygen to iron produces a reddish color. We also know that reddish color of iron and oxygen as rust, so it's a rusty red color. Now, there's also two other molecules that are used in many annelids, so the earthworms and other invertebrates. So some invertebrates use hemocyanin, but there is another form of the molecule that uses iron. Instead of hemoglobin, it's called hemerythrin. And it also binds oxygen, but it's a little different shape of the molecule. And in this case, when oxygen binds to the iron, instead of a dark red, it's more of a pinkish color. So hemerythrin, shown here in this picture, is kind of a purple pinkish color. And it's all based on just the different shape of the molecule compared to hemoglobin. Finally, we're not showing the molecule here, but there's another one that's found in a rare animal, the tube worms that are found at the bottom of the ocean floor. They use this molecule called chlorocrucin, which also uses iron, but in the case of this structure, forms a greenish color, kind of like hemocyanin. But instead of copper, it actually is iron, but it's based on just the shape of the molecule. So here are some of the molecular images. And so this is showing the chlorocrullin that forms a greenish color in marine worms and also in some leeches. And you can see there's a very close similarity between hemoglobin here and this molecule, but note where, and the oxygen is binding to an iron molecule in the middle, but there's a couple of different bonds that cause the different coloring. And then hemocyanin and hemerythrin, you can also maybe appreciate they have a lot of similarity between their molecular shape. So that gives us some indication of probably how these systems evolved in some way. Okay, that's the end of the components of the blood. Take care.